this is Svetlana from Cosplay, and today I'm going to show you how I made the most difficult cosplay in 20 years of crafting. So last year I already made Beidou from Genshin Impact, and she was already quite challenging, but this year Hoyoverse, the studio behind the game, asked me to create Yelan, who is even more challenging. Luckily, Benni already made her signature bow, the Aqua Simulacra. Check out the video if you missed it. But now it's my turn to create the whole costume completely from scratch. While Yelan looks incredibly gorgeous in-game, her design is actually really complicated and challenging. And yes, sewing is still not my strength, I would say, but only because I just feel much more comfortable working with foam and I know then what I'm doing. And for Yelan, I actually used over 20 different fabrics, had several mental breakdowns and cried only a little bit to finish this hot Hydro Archer. And if you never heard of Genshin Impact before, it's a super fun open world adventure game which you can play on mobile, PC and PlayStation completely for free. I love its constantly developing storyline and its gorgeous character designs. Its latest chapter, patch 4.0, opens up Fontaine, the kingdom of the Hydro Archon. The new region is so stunning, and my favorite part is digging into all its new puzzles and amazing minigames. And just as the powerful Hydro Archon, Yelan is also a Hydro character as well. She's my favorite and I'm so excited to bring her to life. And if you're interested in Genshin Impact yourself, check out the affiliate link in the video description down below. This helps us a lot for collaborations like this, and your support is really appreciated. Thanks so much. And now let's start crafting. So, before we start building anything, let's appreciate the general insanity of Genshin Impact designs first. I mean, yes, those characters look incredible and really cool, but when you take a closer look at Yelan, for example, you'll notice that her jacket is floating magically on her shoulders. I also really had to build in a bra somehow, since I would need a lot of padding to get even a tiny bit close to that. Her back is completely open though, but a bra with that much padding needs straps. And I also had no idea if she actually was wearing a dress with leggings or a top with a bodysuit. But we'll figure out all of this along the way, right? Okay, but now let's stop panicking and start crafting. The floating jacket should be the first part of this project. Its design looked kind of logical, and I was actually really excited to see it in real life. To create the pattern, I grabbed some cheap linen fabric and began draping the pattern freely on my dress form. This process actually gets a lot easier with some experience, and working with pre-made patterns clearly helps learning how to create your own. At this point, everything was still fine though, and I seriously thought this costume wouldn't be that difficult. Oh my, how wrong I was! As you might notice, I actually created the jacket as a functional one. I would never wear it, but I thought it makes more sense to make it properly. Once the first draft was fine, I traced all parts with some adjustments and sew allowance once again. And this was then the final result. Should do the job, I think. My fabric of choice was this wonderful white brocade with some pretty ornaments. I traced all mock-up parts onto the material and cut them out. Then I paint all parts together and run them through my sewing machine. By the way, I'm using here extra thin needles which don't hurt the material. All seams then got ironed and the base of the jacket was done. Next, I had to attach the sleeves. And yes, I'm an obsessive pin user. I prepared the hoodie as well and sewed it on afterwards. The sleeves still had to be shortened though, and the edges needed to be finished. I actually still did a ton of adjustments once the base was done, but I just feel more comfortable working this way. As you can see, the result looked already pretty good. Now on to the lining. I basically just repeated all previous steps you already saw before, but this time with my shiny grey linen fabric. So a ton of pattern tracing, cutting, I'm using my anti-fraying scissors by the way here, a ton of pinning and sewing it all together. it actually took me several days to finish the lining, so the YouTube time skip really doesn't do the work justice. And this was just the base. At least everything looked good so far. Now on to the details. First up, the weird sleeves. What you see here is actually the result of a lot of trial and error. I had to cut a lot of footage out to keep this video under 1 hour, as I'm not sure how many people would like to see a 4 hours long making of video with, like me, mostly laying on the floor and crying. Anyway, let's continue pretending everything worked out the first try. These sleeves took a lot of work steps, required many different materials and so much fabric glue. For the whole costume, I actually used over 20 different fabrics, and I had to estimate all of that months before I started working on the project. Luckily, some of the materials, like this gorgeous fur, was already hiding in one of my boxes. I tend to buy fabrics that I might need one day on random shopping hauls, and this fur had to wait over 5 years until I could finally use it. But as you can see, with some padding and hairspray, it worked very well. Just had to hand stitch it onto the hoodie at the end and add some snap buttons here and there. So good! For the details on the back, I covered the jacket with painter's tape. Then I drew all shapes onto it by hand, pulled off the tape, and Benni took a photo of it to trace a clean version of it in Adobe Illustrator. Pretty cool, right? I grabbed this pretty faux leather, which Benni then laser cut with our lovely Beambox Pro from Flux. It's an absolutely amazing machine and makes cutting details so much easier. Here I actually still added some top stitching for a nicer finish, but some of the smaller details were so fragile that my sewing machine would not even grab them anymore. So I left them as they were. Looks pretty awesome, right? Adding those details with a ton of fabric glue is seriously my favorite step. Sure, if I mess something up, then it's quite bad and cannot be fixed anymore, so I tried not to mess it up. Wow, so pretty! I love it! How nice that I also still had some gigantic silver iron-on rivets laying around. What a coincidence! Now for the 3D details, Benni and his brother Jacob used the original 3D model of Yelan, spooky, to create them piece by piece in Blender. Just check out Benni's Blender videos here on our channel if you want to learn this stuff as well. 3D printing little details like that is life-saving for cosplay, especially if you want to create something exactly like in the reference. And here were all parts for the jacket. Before sending them to our 3D printer though, we used a paper print to estimate the right size for each element. Those Genshin characters don't really have human proportions, so making some adjustments is really crucial. But this should work. Next, Benni prepared the models for the 3D print, filled up our Anycubic resin printer, and the machine began its work. Once done, those pieces still needed to be scratched off the plate, properly cleaned in water and alcohol, freed from their support material, and cured with UV light. The result looked pretty amazing though, and barely required any sanding. Last but not least, Benni printed the shoulder piece on our FDM machine, as it would be too brittle and heavy with resin. Looked still pretty good though. He then finished all parts with a little bit of sanding, added a thin layer of spray primer, spent some more time sanding, and finally painted piece by piece, mostly with shiny spray paint from our local Hoyoverse store. Even though some people think 3D printing is cheating, you can surely see how much time, skill and effort it takes to finish these pieces. The final parts were so nice and shiny and looked absolutely incredible. Now it was my turn again to glue all of them on. I always use Gütermann HT2 fabric glue. It can glue fabric to pretty much anything. And again, messing up was no option. Finally, I also connected all parts of the fluffy tail on Yelan's back. I won't show you how I made the fur sausage, as it was just the same technique I used for her hoodie. Whatever it is, it's so pretty. Just had to sew it on and Yelan's jacket was done. Oh my god, I worked a full week just on this part, but the insanity of this costume only had begun. Also, at this point, I still had no idea how I would make this thing float on my shoulders. Guess we'll find it out soon? Let's tackle the dress next. Even when I have no idea how to figure out the shape of a costume piece, doing a duct tape wrap is always a good start. Benni obviously had to help me to draw on the shapes, as getting these right was super important here. Next, I cut out all pieces and got this wonderful puzzle. Yay! Then it was time to create a fabric mock-up. Let's speed this part up. I traced all parts, cut them out, got this puzzle here, sewed everything together, made a pretty flappy for the back, and this was the result. Looked good and should not be too hard to make, right? Right? To get really precise patterns though, I traced all parts again on paper. My fabric for the final dress was this wonderful heavy satin I found in a local shop. So let's repeat all steps again with the proper fabric. Tracing, cutting, these were all the pieces, pinning and sewing. By now you surely already know the drill. The dress slowly took shape and I did my best to do one step after the other. I struggled a lot with the see-through net part of the dress, and at the end I decided to use a skin-toned, non-stretchy fabric and sewed a mesh fabric on top. This part actually needed to hold the whole dress together. I was also lucky to find a bra that could be attached behind my neck and my lower back. It had to be covered with black pleather though. As you can see, a cosplayer should always have enough duct tape in their workshop. Once sewn together, I had the perfectly fitting cover for my bra and only had to add a second layer made with the super slippery net fabric, got a little mental breakdown here, and sewed the crappy mesh on more skin-toned fabric at the end. I'm pretty sure by now the comments under this video will be full of people telling me that I should have done this or that way, but by the end of this video I hope you will understand why I did everything the way I did. I was all by myself with my poor brain and had no idea what I was doing most of the time. So just trust the process and ignore the weird things. Speaking of weird parts, the flappy back cover. It worked great in my mock-up, but required quite some more work as well. Looked very pretty on my dress foam though. Okay, on to the lining. Ta-da! Already cut out and assembled, all through the power of video editing. I actually enjoy lining a lot since my overheated brain can shut down a bit and relax. Next, I added some extra padding for the bra and the lining was done. Looked so much better now. Oh yeah, and then I redid the back flappy part since it was too wobbly and created too many weird wrinkles. So I redid everything with an improved pattern and some extra stiffing material this time. Worked out well, right? Into the trash with the old one. Now only some snap buttons were missing and the base of the dress was done. Looks all so quickly and easy when compressed like this, right? Oh well. Okay, let's add some fun details now. Since everything was finished, I only had to cover the dress step by step with painter's tape and draw on everything I needed. Benni then took photos of my drawings, turned them into vector designs and cut all parts out with our laser cutter. So clean and nice and pretty. Afterwards, the gluing fun could begin. This step is always so satisfying. Oh yes, and it doesn't require much brain power, even better. At this point, Benni also checked out the right size for the 3D printed pieces and turned on the machine again. After some cleaning up, the accessories already looked great. Just some priming and painting and I could glue these on as well. Next up, Benni could laser cut all parts for my bra and I could finish this too. These were so many layers and details already. I could have cut out everything by hand, but the laser cutter is far more precise and even seals the burnt edges to prevent the material from fraying. Super handy. While I used a lot of Gütermann fabric glue for the smaller things, the larger ones were attached with iron-on glue by the way. For the crystal-like parts of the costume, we used transparent resin for our resin printer. The finished prints already looked quite amazing, even though they got dull again after sanding. I dyed the material in some hot water and I dyed poly next, and I think they looked absolutely amazing in blue. So pretty. With this, Benni could now finish the brooch for my neck, but also Yelan's iconic dice, so I could finally put all parts together and attach them. The very last detail were these gigantic silver rivets, and the dress was finally finished. Well, the front side at least. The back flappy still needed some love as well. So here is some more pattern drawing, laser cutting, gluing and attaching 3D printed parts. By now I think you can almost smell the glue through your screen, right? Yay! Success! The dress was really difficult to make and required a lot of patience. I also still had no idea how to attach the floating jacket onto it and how to add the leggings so they would look like one single piece. But I was just excited and relieved that this part was finished. And I think it looked really good. The next part was Yelan's super weird hair. Seriously, her stylist must be either a genius or a madman. I'm not great at wig styling myself, however, so I invited Crystal Cosplay to help me out. She's an amazing artist and offered her help with Yelan's hairstyle. For the base, she used a bright blue mid-long wig, which she pinned onto a styrofoam head first. To get the right shade, she boiled some water with red dye for synthetic fibers. As you might have noticed, Yelan's top hair is actually darker than the lower part, so she dyed only half of the wig. Believe me, I was just as fascinated as you watching her progress. And in case you wonder, Crystal is actually half cyborg. After the remaining dye was carefully washed out and dried a bit, this was the result so far. Next, the crimping and teasing fun began. Here Crystal went very carefully through every section and built up a massive volume. I'm usually far too impatient for this step and mess everything up at the end. Watching a master at work, however, was super inspiring. Afterwards, it was time to trim the wig into the right length. She did some rough cuts first and then used my hat as a guide to get the exact style. As you can see, she used hair clips to place some markers, which helped her to figure out the right length for each section. And these are all the products Crystal would use for her next steps. Don't forget to take notes. The side cut over the ear, for example, was built up with some translucent liquid glue, and she even added some extra top hair cut out from a second wig. This idea was so genius that it completely blew my mind. She also used the second wig to add extra hair on top as well. After some additional fitting, Crystal gathered some volume at the back, added a braid, and finally began to cut Yelan's super weird bangs. These were actually done with an electric razor, as it's far more precise than regular scissors. Yes, I know, mind-blowing. I learned so much just from watching Crystal work. Finally, she smoothed out the hairline with a steamer and made sure she didn't miss any strands. I think doing the super weird bangs was the hardest part, as they were completely crazy and required a ton of hairspray. And I also surely wouldn't dare just to brush a ton of glue into the wig. But Crystal used this glue to attach some batting and then covered it up with more hair. So fascinating! I think wig styling is just another level of crafting. The idea of messing up all my work any moment would completely paralyze me. And this is why I asked my friend to do this super complicated wig for me. Finally, she finished the braid with some extra hair and added a few dark blue shadows with Benni's airbrush. This gave the wig more texture and improved the color gradient of the final hairstyle. And here was the final result. Crystal did an absolutely amazing job with Yelan's wig, and I absolutely loved her work. Thanks so much for helping me out. Next, onto the gloves. As both have quite a unique design, this part required some extra brain power. At least the first step was easy though, tracing the shape of my hand on the paper and cutting it out. My material of choice was this lovely stretch faux leather that I bought years ago in a local fabric shop. I roughly cut out 2 layers, traced my pattern onto it, placed a few pins here and there and sewed all around. I know this process looks almost too easy, but it actually works. Now I only had to get rid of the excess material, shorten the fingertips, finish the ends nice and pretty, place some tape, and Benni made me a perfectly laser cut golden detail. And my left glove was done. Now only a few extras were missing. To build up some volume, I glued 2mm foam into my white pleather, sewed around the edges, got some shiny 3D printed pieces from Benni, attached them with a good amount of fabric glue, and my arm wrist was done as well. The bracelet gave me quite some headaches, but Benni found a nice solution while using his 3D modeling skills. He printed 2 halves of it on our resin printer, and I glued in tiny magnets to hold it together. Well, kind of. Next, Benni primed and painted the bracelet. Last but not least, I glued on some extra rubber bands to keep both parts together and to still be able to easily slip into this construction. And as you can see, the plan worked out perfectly. So happy with this piece. And this was the whole left glove. Fit nicely and I loved all its details. Now onto the right glove. This one was far more complicated though. First, I separated my basic glove pattern into 3 sections. This time I used a stretchy pleather and repeated all those steps you saw previously for the white glove. However, this net fabric here made everything so much more complicated. It was really difficult to mark, pin and sew, even though the first half of the glove was still kind of doable. I used around 1 million pins and prayed a lot that I would get this right. Looked promising at least. Okay, but now the true pain began. First, cutting the glove into the final shape was super scary, as I was really afraid to mess up my work so far. Second, working with this net fabric was not only a nightmare, but I literally had no idea how to attach it properly onto the rest of the glove. So I grabbed the mannequin arm, pulled both glove parts over it, and challenged my luck by just hand stitching both pieces together. I have to mention here that I already had a few failed tries with the sewing machine, followed by 1 or 2 mental breakdowns, so the hand stitching solution was actually the 3rd try. But it worked! Last but not least, I did again some taping and glued on a few missing laser cut details. Did I already mention how much I love our laser cutter? To finish the upper part of the glove, I made another 4-letter foam combo, notice the silicone tape here, and attached it with a few further stitches. And finally, I could glue on Benni's 3D printed pieces as well. The last detail was Yelan's blue translucent bracelet. It actually lights up in the game, but we decided to ignore this fact as it would make things far too complicated. But hey, as you can see, we used here translucent resin to print it out and it looked super glossy. Sending away the support and remaining layer lines, however, made it look quite dull again. The bath and blue eye-dye poly changed the color but didn't improve the shininess as well. So Benni grabbed some Vallejo gloss varnish and made it all nice and shiny again. Much better, right? Finally, I glued on some golden pleather strips and this was the finished bracer. It turned out so pretty. With the bracer done, this was the fully finished right glove. It looked awesome, but it would have been so much easier if the costume would be just a little bit more symmetric, you know? Ah, well. Next, the shoes. With Beidou, I did the critical mistake that I chose ones that were very close to the reference, but quite painful to wear. So this time I tried to do better. The comfy ones I bought got some Velcro tape to easily get in and out and were then covered with tape. I traced, cut out and transferred some patterns, after which Benni cut them out with our laser cutter and I could glue them on. I first covered everything with a dark blue platter and then added all the golden strips and emblems. The front also got a little bit of bright blue. For the back, Benni 3D printed and painted me a shiny blue jewel that I simply hot glued to the backside. A few last golden details and the shoes were done. Oh, and by the way, I actually left out the golden drop at the front intentionally as I didn't want to attach anything onto the socks I'm wearing here. Really pretty. One of the last things we had to create was Yelan's Hydro Vision. While this piece looked pretty small, it still took a lot of time to build. To start, Benni made a 3D model of the base and the stones in Blender and printed it out on our Anycubic resin printer. Resin prints do not really show any visible layer lines, but especially the stones still needed to be sanded super glossy smooth. Next, Benni sprayed them with a thick layer of white spray paint, super shiny, right? And then built a case for the upcoming silicone mold. He superglued the stones to the plate and I mixed a 2-part silicone, which was then poured into the case very carefully. The product he used took only 3 hours to cure, so he didn't have to wait for too long before he could remove the stones again and got a perfect shiny mold. I prepared a translucent resin, added a few drops of blue dye, mixed everything properly and filled the goo into our silicone mold, but not all the way to the top. Around 6 hours later, everything was hard as rock, which was the perfect time for Benni to cut the hydro symbol out of self-adhesive silver foil. He stuck it to the back of our stones, after which we filled up the rest of the mold with more blue resin. Last but not least, a few additional shiny sparkles. It's gonna look so cool! Now we had to wait another 6 hours, after which we finally could remove the finished stones from the mold. And they turned out so gorgeous. Oh, I love them. Okay, now back to the frame. This one also required a bit more sanding and a thick coat of golden spray paint. Shiny! Now we only had to glue in the stones with a strong 2-component glue, both front and back, add a small blue tassel to the bottom, and Yelan's Hydro Vision was finished. Like I said, these were a lot of work steps for such a small piece, right? But it turned out so pretty though. Oh, by the way, Benni also made these gorgeous earrings for me. This video is already pretty long though, so we didn't film the entire process here. And now we finally reached the very last part of this absolutely insane asymmetrical crafting craziness, the leggings. As always though, it started relatively easy. I used some basic leggings patterns from the internet and did my very best to tape all parts together while Minna tried to get my attention. How am I supposed to focus with so much cuteness around me? My fabric of choice this time was a heavy black lycra. I traced my pattern, cut out the fabric, got them to legs, pinned them together, and used my serger to finish the edges. And this was the result up until here. As you can see, I made the waist super high. Now on to some duct tape fun. Here I had to mark the area I would have to cut out in the following step. Oh, and in case you wonder, I did all of this while actually wearing the leggings since the fabric is stretchy. This way I basically counted in the stretch of the material and avoided having weird wrinkles in the final result. In theory this should work, but cutting the fabric was still pretty scary. Next on, I used the cutout piece to get my pattern for the skin toned replacement fabric. This one needed a large mesh on the top first though. To achieve this, I combined a black platter with an iron-on glue, pulled off the paper at the back, and Benni just laser cut the shape out for me. Ta-da! Perfect! The mesh was then placed onto my beige lycra, ironed on, covered then with my nightmarish net fabric, and was then sewed on around the edges. Finally, I carefully attached the beige piece with 1,000,000 pins onto my leggings and connected both parts with my sewing machine. So far so good. But the taping was still not done. This shape was then traced onto a non-stretchy black platter, and with some pinning and sewing, this was the leather belt, which I also had to pin on again. By the way, before you ask, yes, I stung myself a lot. I sewed this on as well and attached a snap button tape in the next step. This one was supposed to connect the dress and the leggings. Clever, right? And worked like a charm, as you can see. Now more taping. Seriously, every time I finished something, I only realized how much was still left to do. Especially here, Benni was an incredibly help though, and it would have been impossible to finish this part without him. Our laser cutter, a Beambox Pro from Flux, was also very useful here. All parts were then pinned on, and at this point Benni accidentally stuck a needle through my skin, which prevented me from getting out of the leggings again. Yes, I didn't feel the pain. Everything was still fine here, and I did my best to iron it all nice and pretty onto the fabric, but the pieces were just too large, and the result was then wrinkly and ugly and crappy. To fix that, I made an even thicker leather piece with more layers and more stability, which I wanted to sew over the old crappy emblem. For that, I had to rip open all my seams again though. I didn't cry at all. This time I actually sewed all around my edges, and while this extra step took forever, the fixed result looked so much better though. Yay, very satisfying. As you can see, the other side was already done as well. I actually used this side as my test and messed everything up completely before I could film the leg that you just saw. And even the pretty one still had some issues, as you noticed. The last part that gave us even more headaches were these bronze stripes at the front and the back of Yelan's leggings. I wasn't able to find a fabric that was strong and durable enough to be constantly stretched, so we decided to just paint on these details. I almost passed out from standing 3 hours straight while the fabric got painted, but only almost. Finally, Benni only had to glue on some 3D printed details, add here and there some more shiny things. I placed then my silver fake rivets, attached the finished vision, and the leggings were finally done as well. Gosh, this costume part was seriously the worst and so difficult to figure out, and I was just incredibly happy that it was finally over. Well, and here is what you have been waiting for so patiently. After 5 weeks of very intense crafting and several mental breakdowns, my Yelan cosplay from Genshin Impact was complete. Bringing her to life was my toughest challenge in 20 years of cosplay. I used over 20 different fabrics for the costume, and as you will have noticed now, every single element of her outfit required a lot of problem solving. It was so worth it at the end, however, and I'm so incredibly proud that we managed to make it in time. To get a few final photos of the finished cosplay, we went to the stunning Monte Palace, a botanical garden on Madeira with a lot of Japanese architecture and decorations. The pretty red bridges, pagodas and torii gates were perfect and looked like straight out of Inazuma. Benni took a lot of pretty photos, and we even managed to edit one in time for the release of the video. Hope you like it! The grand finale of this whole project was my appearance at Gamescom in Germany, however. This event was the whole reason why I only had 6 weeks to finish everything. Just like last year, Hoyoverse and Genshin Impact invited me to their booth, and this time I had the honor to present Yelan on stage. I had an amazing time in Germany and got to meet so many sweet people. Thank you all so much for following me through this insane project. Thanks so much for watching and congratulations for making it to the end of the video. You made it. You can be very proud of it. And yeah, I think this video especially was very intense, very long, and I think it also especially showed how much time, work, effort, patience and tears can go in creating a costume from scratch, especially from Genshin Impact. And Yelan was especially difficult because every single costume piece required new techniques, new materials, like new problem solving. Yelan was really insane, and she was clearly my most challenging cosplay in 20 years of crafting. And also thanks so much to Hoyoverse again for this really amazing collaboration. Even though Yelan was really challenging, it was an incredibly rewarding project and taught me just so many things, especially being patient and that it's actually okay to redo things again and again and again. And also, if you want to check out Genshin Impact, please use the affiliate link in the video description down below. As said, this supports us a lot and the game is actually also really fun and I highly recommend it. And last but not least, like and subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos, and there will be a lot of upcoming videos. I mean, we hit 1 million on YouTube. That's really amazing. Thanks so much for your support. And also in the comments, let me know which was your favorite costume piece, or maybe which character would you like to see me next. And I'm very sure this costume won't be as challenging as Yelan, right? And if you don't know what to write, just write on Corgi and support us with the YouTube algorithm and join the Corgi squad. Now, finally, thank you very much for watching and see you very soon in the next video. Bye bye.